Tell me, where is your maker now?
There is nothing quite like embarking on a 100-hour-long epic fantasy quest with 9 trusting companions and a sense of doom hanging over your head. It's been 3 years since we last ventured through the hills of Ferelden, smelled Orlesian perfume, or furiously pressed the hard option on the dialogue wheel whenever we got the chance.
Have one prepared, I'd love to hear it.
Another time, perhaps.
Since then, there's been plenty of speculation in regards to the story and the characters it involved. The last DLC to be released, that being Trespasser, tried in a very fan-driven way to wrap up the story, but it still left a lot to be desired and, therefore, a lot of questions unanswered. However, what fascinated me most in my first playthrough of Inquisition, and what continues to intrigue me to this day, is the amount of detail in the carefully crafted environments and character designs. It's here that the answers to a lot of those unanswered questions can, in fact, be found. If you've ever wondered what goes into designing one of your beloved companions, or why there is a big censor box covering the only soft parts on the Ironbull, well, look no further. Inquisition is a strange mix of spoon-feeding information through clunky dialogue, no matter how character-breaking it might be, versus weaving lore and character details confidently and silently into the visuals. One example of handholding that springs to mind is when Cassandra chooses to tell you, a prisoner that she does not trust, absolutely everything that transpired before you were caught. This includes how she feels about the situation, how distraught she is, who all the important characters you need to remember are, her grief over the death of Divine Justinia, and, most importantly, her newfound conclusion to that grief. All in the span of, 2 minutes? That is a lot to tell to a total stranger you're holding captive and have no personal relation to whatsoever. While the game has these extreme moments of hand-holding where it feels like you're not trusted to follow the story, there are also some incredibly strong moments of storytelling through simple set dressing. The choice of fabrics and armor a character wears, how they hold their head when they walk, the things that never get explained but are just there, are some of the best ways Inquisition tells its story. It's the untold characteristics that help bring the world to life and set the imagination of the player going. To start off my deep dive into the fantastical world of Dragon Age Inquisition, I'll start with the broadest scope, the environment. I personally find the Dragon Age series fascinating to look at in terms of growth in art direction, as all 3 main games are so visually different from one another. Origins was gritty with mostly red and purple washes of color everywhere. Dragon Age 2 was grey and pointy, as it is officially described by the team itself, and Inquisition is a lush and colourful world with distinctive designs defining the classes, races, and countries. I think it's fair to say that Dragon Age 2 looked very different from the first Dragon Age, as its development was fairly rushed. Some fans disagree with the final look and plot of the game. Nonetheless, it still played a huge part, alongside the first game, in Dragon Age Inquisition's world building. Inquisition drew heavily from both, as it brought together a cohesive and more modern look for Inquisition that would set it apart from other fantasy games like it. Inquisition has numerous locations, some small and only there for short missions, and others huge and ever-present that you continuously return to throughout the game. It was important to the team to make sure that the world was as ever-changing as possible, be it destructive, romantic, opulent, threatening, or inviting, while still having a red thread connecting the locations and visual style together. To do this, they broke down the basics of each place into key concepts with strong independent references for each area. For example, Orlais is described as being curvy, gold, facade-focused and extravagant, inspired by places like Versailles, whereas Ferelden is rustic, square and built from wood and stone. Qunari architecture were in particular inspired by Scandinavian churches with huge, blocky wooden structures, and Tevinter is all about showing off, in a very aggressive manner, which they translated mostly through spikes. to keep the Inquisition visually apart from the rest of the world, while also keeping in mind that its ranks are filled with people coming from all over Thedas, they designed the symbols used by the Inquisition in battle, on their armor, and as decorations to be oppressive and intimidating. The Inquisition has to show power and that it is above all others, or at least capable of domination. And one particular symbol, the eye, is the most apparent one. As you take over the Inquisition, or rather you end up ruling it by chance, as the game literally doesn't give you the option to say no, you take over an already established power, one that is ultimately oppressive. The eye is basically saying we are watching to anyone who sees it. Alas, it's not just the eye the Inquisition uses as an oppressive symbol. The Inquisitors' advisors all have symbols of their own, used to plan out their missions on the map in the war room. Here we find symbols such as a small fortress and a fist carrying a spiked D-ring. Neil Thompson, the director of art and animation on the game, mentioned that it was interesting to take these supposedly negative symbols and turn them into something heroic, depending on how you choose to rule as the Inquisitor. It's not just the Inquisition that's decorated with heavy symbolism meant to invoke a certain feeling to anyone who passes by. If I had to point out the country in Thedas that, above all else, treasures keeping up appearances, we have to look at Olay. To make a comparison, Olay is the stark opposite of Ferelden. Ferelden, which is a country focused on good, honest work and the transparency thereof, they are not ones to boast, and they use the materials they have in the most rational way. Like Haven, the first base you have in the game is built from wood and stone and has very few red and gold adornments. Haven is placed far up into the mountains, and transporting any expensive materials so far up into treacherous terrain is a huge risk. Olay does not care about that. Olay is a country built on political intrigue and deceptions. It is a physically grandiose facade built on a crumbling foundation. It gets rid of the old, never speaks of it again. It's gluttonous and wasteful of riches and people. It's about form, not function. A quote from the Art of Dragon Age Inquisition describes it best. It doesn't matter if it's weak, as long as it doesn't look weak. Basically, it doesn't matter if that corset is killing you, darling. A rib or two is not the worst thing you can break. This is best shown when you arrive at the Winter Palace in Halam Shiral. At first, when you start the mission, the Winter Palace is presented as a place of power. It's so meticulously decorated, it's almost a bit too much. There's no way for your eyes to escape the massive amount of gold. But something interesting happens the moment you step away from the party and the gala turns into a crime scene investigation, and there is a stark change in the environment. It's almost like getting a forbidden peek at the backstage of a theater set, and it shatters the magic of the facade the Winter Palace is trying to uphold. This part of the palace is fading away, the wallpapers are frayed, windows are broken, and dust has turned the furniture grey. The entire place feels forgotten, but it doesn't matter as long as no one sees it. After all, you weren't supposed to be in this area at all. This is an interesting and subtle way of telling the players that, despite Olay seeming very grand, there is a deeply flawed infrastructure behind it. And not just because the people of Olay will stab their mother in the back for the right price. Moving away from opulent Olay to plague-ridden inspiration, Neil Thompson described how Dragon Age and fantasy in general was inspired by art from the medieval times. The Middle Ages was a time where death was a constant threat through sickness and plague. The artists back in the day dealt with the fear of sudden expiration through paintings with a playful sense of impending doom, something that they purposely brought into Inquisition. The Spanish Baroque in particular served as a great source of inspiration for the tarot cards that represent the 9 companions, your class and race, and several other aspects of the game. The playful way they dealt with dread through bodily contortion during the Spanish Baroque sparked the imagination of the artist at BioWare, and they ended up creating a whole deck of tarot cards. Depending on how you play the game, each companion has several illustrations describing the route you set out for them, be it good or bad. If you got this particular card from the Iron Bull, then you're worse than me when I made Alistair Grey Warden in Origins just so I could leave him in the Fate in Inquisition. Now that we have discussed the environment in the world of Dragon Age Inquisition quite a bit, I want to bring your attention to the Inquisitors' 9 companions. As the team behind Dragon Age started the production of Inquisition with all the experience they had accumulated from making Dragon Age 2, which could have been a brilliant game if it got half as much development time as it deserved, there, I said it. Dragon Age 2 is good and it could have been brilliant. No, I will not take that back. They learned from their mistakes and changed the process of how they developed the world of Inquisition. Rather than heavily segregating the work between the various departments, they aimed to have a whole creative team work together from day one. They chose to pull in the concept artist at the same time as the writers, so the artists could pitch in with ideas and develop designs more closely related to the written character. For reference's sake, a very typical way of designing an asset, or in this case a character, goes like this. A writer comes up with a character in written form, could be anything from a few lines to a couple of pages long, and hands it to an artist who then has to make hundreds of iterations that the respective directors can choose from. This process then goes back and forth a couple of times, and sometimes the artists don't know the full story of the character, or even the game, in fear that something might leak. So their drawings are based on pleasant aesthetics rather than well thought out designs that speak true to their character. This can result in a lot of wasted work and inconsistent characters, or characters that are aesthetically nice but don't actually convey anything that relates to them or even the world they're set in. For Dragon Age Inquisition, the artists were there from day one. They heard the whole story of the characters and even pitched ideas for some of them. The Iron Bull was a pitch from an artist, not a writer. As with the environments, the characters had to be broken down to their most basic form. They knew going in that they had to create 3 warriors, 3 rogues and 3 mages. They knew that Cassandra and Varric from earlier games would definitely be on the team, but the rest was still to be designed. So to give the artists inspiration for their first drawings, they gave each character only 2 or 3 key words. They were the Fake Warden, Funny Mercenary, Rockstar Mage, Dexter Butterfly, the Old Wolf, Dirty Robin Hood, and lastly, Ghost of the Spire. After they settled on the key words, they moved on to discuss what gender and race the different characters should have, aiming to keep the game balanced but not necessarily have an even number in the party. Through this design process, gems like Solas emerged, due to the fact that the artists were allowed such crucial information as his endgame reveal, which, spoiler if you haven't finished the game, it's quite a twist. The artist could then hint at this twist from the very beginning of the game without the player even noticing. Solas presents himself as the humble hermit, another descriptor from the team behind him. He's empathetic and understanding, but as you get to know him, you realize he is in fact quite spiteful and idealistic. It isn't until the end of the game, however, that he is revealed to be the big bad guy who is the reason for the mark on your hand, for Corypheus's whole deal, and so much more, and is actually a god named Finn Harel. To make matters worse, he was in your party this whole time, tricking and manipulating you, never once giving it away, except for in his design. An artist working on Solas's design got the brilliant idea to place a wolf's jawbone hanging around his neck as a necklace, screaming in your face who he actually is. But as there is no point in the game where he hints at his necklace, you only find out at the very end what it actually represented. It's not just with the art, but also small things as the sound design, as allegedly whenever Solas enters a new area, you can hear wolves howling in the distance. As we have already established, Dragon Age is a deeply well thought out game where every asset has been given a fair amount of attention to detail. Even though the world of Thedas is falling apart, there's always room for laughter. An idea and feeling that you can sense comes from the team itself. The team, of course, do take their jobs incredibly seriously, but that doesn't stop them from being mischievous once in a while, and some of those jokes really go below the belt. Matthew Goldman, the lead concept artist on Inquisition, saw an opportune moment to play a prank on a fellow artist and his dedication to the Iron Bull's more delicate areas. The prank ended up becoming a long and hard journey to discover just how detailed the finer areas of the Iron Bull should and could be. After a week of studying dozens of references in all shapes, sizes, and conditions, and lovingly rendering the tool of the bull, Matthew Goldman described the bull's modern dagger like so.
I was like, this has got to be better than Dr. Manhattan's dong. Okay? That dong wasn't realistic.
That's the benchmark.
Okay, it was nuclear powered.
But where is this nuclear-powered mini-bull, you might ask? It never appeared in any romance scenes, and I'm quite certain it's too big to shy away and shrink out of frame. Unfortunately, the game has to be somewhat family-friendly, but instead of going back over Ironbone's model, which they certainly had the expertise to do at this point, they instead plopped the black box on top of it. This box can only be seen, by the way, if you install the flycam and move around one of his romance scenes yourself. Yep. They censored the bull's willy. On that note, that was 5 interesting and delicate details of the world and characters in Dragon Age Inquisition hidden in plain sight. Thank you all so much for watching. If you like it, please do take a look at all the other stuff we have here on the channel. Like and subscribe if you want to see more, and most importantly, have an awesome week. Until next time!